Got to record it to the computer. Yes, please. I said at the beginning, that Achashverosh, according to the Malbim, he's mentioned Achashverosh at the beginning of the Megillah without the title king, and that's the only time in the whole Megillah he does not have the title king. And so according to the Malbim, he was the king who was not from royalty. He took over the government, maybe he was a general in the army or something like that. It would be interesting to look into the history of the Persian Empire, whether they're all related or not. You know, the various Antiochus and Darius and Seleucids and Xerxes, whether they're actually related or whether there was a power struggle. That's an interesting question. As I said, many of the historians think that Ahasuerus was Xerxes the first, who was like the third or fourth king of the Persian Empire. The first, of course, is Cyrus, who allows the Jews to go up to Jerusalem and build the temple. There's also one of the Achashveroshes, by the way, or Darius, I forget which one, who actually did not allow them or changed his mind in the book of Ezra. Anyhow, but this, as I said, when you are not from a king, from royal descent, then you have two possibilities. You can either try to win over the people by being the nice guy who they're going to support, or you can be the tyrant, you know, the sort of the Stalin type, and then you don't have to win them over. You just have to control them by an iron fist. Doesn't always work. Shlomo's son Rechavam tried to control the people by an iron fist, and there was a split in the kingdom with the north and the south kingdom. The rebellion of Yerovam ben Nevat. It doesn't always work. Sometimes it does. So Achashverosh, in chapter 3, first he sees there is Bigtan V'Teresh plotting against him, which means it's the tip of an iceberg, because a plot at that magnitude means there are other people behind it. People who are smiling to him during the 7 days of the Mesibah, the banquet, but really are plotting against him. And because of this, he realizes he has to make the move, and now no more nice guy. And look exactly what happens in chapter 3. You have the movement away from the nice guy to the dictator, and that's chapter 3. What's the first thing a dictator has to do? Take, for instance, Saddam Hussein or Stalin or Hitler, or what do you do when you are such a dictator in order to ensure your survival?
You purge.
Kill. Yeah.
Yeah, well, he actually doesn't, yes, but he doesn't know who it is. So it's not going to help. You're not at the beginning of your reign. You're a few years into your reign. So you have to get rid of the one. So first of all, he hangs Bigtan V'Teresh, of course, but he doesn't know who the other people are. So there are a few things you have to do. Number one is keep yourself away from public view. You have to have doubles who look like you. You also have to be very strict about people unauthorized who want to see you, because that could be the beginning of a plot. So it also becomes a part of a paranoia, which you start to develop too. I assume that Sinwar is under that paranoia. That's probably why he doesn't want to speak to the other people in all the Hamas people who are in Qatar. Because from his point of view, he's in survival mode and they're in diplomatic mode. So he's not interested in them. Okay, so chapter 3. After these events, meaning the plot against the king, Gidal Hamelech Achashverosh and Haman. So Achashverosh decides to make Haman the viceroy of the Persian Empire. So Haman will now go out instead of the king, and the king will stay at home. And as we know from chapter 4, when the king stays at home and anybody wants to see the king, they have to give a permission slip, or else achat dato lahamid, or else it's the death penalty. Remember the story of Esther? Says to Mordechai in chapter 4, I haven't been called to the king for 30 days, and if you're not called to the king, it could be capital punishment. It's been a while. So that's chapter 3. Chapter 3 is no more nice guy. After these things with the plot against the king, he basically promoted, advanced Haman ben Hamdata, which I told you, Haman, the name of Haman is one of the gods of the Persian pantheon, Hamachshava Hatova. Gagagi reminds us, of course, of Agag, the king of Amalek. And I assume that as part of the narrative of Megillat Esther, this was done on purpose. Meaning every plot against the Jews is a bit of an Amalekite. So even though there's no way that this is the same Agag of Sefer Shmuel, but ideologically it's the same. It's this hatred for no reason. It says about Amalek, it's like, it says, also it says about Amalek, what does it say? So some people say karcha b'derech from the word mikre. They bumped into you by chance and they decided to fight you, right? It's like this ununderstandable, unexplainable hatred. So this is Haman ben Hamdata, who considers himself very important. Very often these guys are. By Nasem, and he was advanced and emanated. Vayasem et Kiso, meaning he became his eminence. Vayasem et Kiso mi'al kol hasarim asher he put himself above all the other ministers. And all the king's servants who were in the king's gate would kneel and prostrate themselves before Haman. For so the king commanded concerning him, but Mordechai would kneel or prostrate himself. Now, Chazal say that he wore around his neck some type of avodah zarah. The truth is, even if he didn't, by bowing to Haman, who also has the name of the avodah zarah of one of the pantheon of Persia, it's a problem by itself. Secondly, why do you, bowing to a person who's not even the king? And it says, Mordechai lo yichra v'lo yishtachaveh. The Maharal says, what does it mean Mordechai will not prostrate himself or bow down? Meaning he won't kneel or bow down. Maharal says like this: if Haman was walking on the other side of the street and Mordechai was walking on this side of the street, Mordechai would go to the same side of the street of Haman in order to make a point that he doesn't bow down. That's called Mordechai lo yichra v'lo yishtachaveh. He on purpose does not bow down before other people. So that's why Haman, that's why it ticked them off.
Well, and what was the reason? It's because a Jew doesn't bow down, or because it was
doesn't bow down.
Okay.
I learned a few years ago that Haman and Mordechai were military officers together, and I forgot what, but but Haman owed Mordechai, like he saved his life or something, and he owed him. But they were equal in the military.
I'm not familiar. This must be a midrash which I'm not familiar with. Okay. But if you find it, I'd like to know.
That's why he didn't bow down to him, to show him that he owes him, like Mordechai.
Okay, I just don't know, so it's hard for me.
Yeah.
Again, midrashim, sometimes they're there to make a point, and sometimes they're there to fill in information which makes sense. And you have to know the difference between the two. As Rambam says in his introduction to Chelek, that the midrashim very often are remazim. They're riddles and metaphors. Like it says in Mishlei, Lahavin mashalom melitza divrei chachamim v'chidotam. To try to understand metaphors and riddles, the words of the sages and their enigmas. So the sages say things sometimes in riddles and enigmas and metaphors, because that's the way of the sages, especially when they're talking about things which are metaphysical. The Talmud very often, when it talks about metaphysical things, it says something which is like it's obvious, it's symbolic. Like it says that when Moshe was davening before God, so God put on a talis, like a shliach tzibur. Like, what does that even mean? So, you have, or it says that Kadosh Baruch Hu puts on tefillin. So the Talmud and Brachot says, in our tefillin it says, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. What does it say in Hashem's tefillin? Oh, in his tefillin it says, Umi Kamcha Yisrael Goy Echad Ba'aretz. And who is like the Jewish people, one people in the land. So obviously you understand it's about the relationship here. It's a metaphor. But so usually almost, I would say basically all the midrashic material about metaphysics and the spiritual world are metaphoric. But they're not necessarily, but midrash sometimes, which is talking about the pshat, is not metaphoric. That's why Rashi says, whenever I find a midrash, which is according to the pshat, I use it. If it's not, no. So sometimes Rashi will say, the meaning of this pasuk is such and such, and there's also a midrash. You can take a look. The midrashim are just to talk about the meta understanding of the psukim, meaning to go further into the psukim, to take you on a journey beyond the pshat. So, okay. So, what was I saying here? Chapter 3 again. So according to the Maharal, he doesn't want to bow down. He wants to make a point about it. I'm just not familiar with that other midrash you were talking about. So if you could find it, I'd be interested in knowing where it is. And now, oh, excuse me. It says all the servants were bowing down to the king, to Haman, and Mordechai would not. So the servants of the king said, we're in the gates, meaning that's where Mordechai worked, I guess. Why don't you follow the king's orders? And he used to say to him on a daily basis. And he didn't pay attention. And they told Haman, because they wanted to see what's going to happen. Divrei Mordechai ki gilim asher Yehudi. Once they heard that Mordechai is a Jew, and they knew that Haman was not crazy about Jews, so they told Haman, Mordechai is a Jew. He's not bowing down to you. And I guess they were playing. They wanted to make a showdown and see who would win. People do things like that sometimes, fortunately. So it's like, I can cause problems, so yeah, let's do it. They'll see who's going to win. Have things like that. With certain people, if they can cause troubles, they will just because they can. So, so Haman didn't want, it seemed contemptible to him to lay his hands on Mordechai. Lishloach yad actually means to kill Mordechai. Because they said that he's a Jew. So it's beneath his dignity. So he's not going to kill Mordechai because he didn't bow down. It looks like I have an ego problem, right? Which of course he does. But you don't want it to look like it. It looks like he's a megalomaniac. This guy wouldn't bow down, and therefore he gets the death penalty. Not even sure the king would like that if he heard about it. But instead, we're going to do it in a more interesting way. We'll kill all the Jews. And Mordechai is one of them. It will be a national policy. So, and it'll be all Mordechai's fault because, Jews always argue with each other. A non-Jew does something to the Jews and the Jew blames the Jew. That's what happens. As you can see, instead of blaming Hamas for what happened October 7th, we're too busy blaming each other. I'm not saying that there are people to blame, but we have to remember who the perpetrators were. So, people sort of forget that. Okay. So it's beneath his dignity. Vayiv has been too contemptible, as he says, but it's beneath his dignity just to kill Mordechai because he didn't bow down. So he decides he wants to destroy all the Jews in Achashverosh's entire empire. The first month, which is the month of Nisan. By the way, you know that the months that we use, the Babylonian months, mentioned for the first time in Megillat Esther. The Torah doesn't use the name of the months. The Torah says in Shmot Yud Beit, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim. This month is the first month. And so we call Nisan the first month. But the names of months, the Babylonian names, are not in the 5 books of the Torah. Even the Hebrew names that were used in antiquity, we find only a little bit in Malachim. We find Yerach HaEtanim, which is Tishrei. We find Bul, which was another one. They're not even all mentioned. You have maybe one more out of the ancient Hebrew names of the months. The names that we use are the Babylonian names, which are basically gods of Babylonia. What we call the Hebrew months are the Babylonian months. The Arabs also use the Babylonian months, as we do, and they call them the secular months because they also have religious months, like Ramadan. I mean, months that connect to the Islam. But they, like us, they use Tishrei Cheshvan also from the Babylonian Empire. But of course, in modernity, they also use January, February, March. And the Talmud says that the reason why we use these months, the Tishrei Cheshvan Kislev, is to remind us that we should remember the Babylonian exile. It's Lezecher, the Babylonian exile. To remember, we went through that. So that's the remnant of the Babylonian exile, Tishrei Cheshvan Kislev. So I was once at a bat mitzvah, a daughter of a friend of mine, and she gave a drasha, this kid, and said, okay, if we had to remember the Babylonian exile by Tishrei Cheshvan Kislev, so when all the Jews leave the exile and come to the land of Israel, we can now change it to January, February, March in order to remember this exile. So, which is an interesting idea. I think it's already happened to a great extent. But I thought that was an interesting idea. Okay, so here you have for the first mention of Nisan in the first month. It's the first month. So here also you can see that what it says in Sefer Shemot was followed by the Jews. That the first month is Nisan. It's the Chodesh Hazeh. It's called the first month. In the 12th year of Achashverosh, so he's already 12 years in power when this happens. He peeled Pur. He made a lot. The name Pur is a lottery. It's a Persian word for lottery. So the name of our holiday, Purim, means to draw lots. So, which is another interesting thing, because you have Megillat Esther, which I said means to reveal what's hidden, and what's hidden is God's name or God's presence. And because God's presence is hidden, all you can see is chance. That's called Purim, drawing lots, right? Everything seems to work by chance. The Talmud says that, or it was a Midrash, I forget, if it may be in Midrash and Esther, that Haman was an astrologer. And therefore he wanted to know when exactly to draw the lots. Okay. So he tried to figure everything out. And also when it came out on Zayin Adar, figured that's a great time because that's when Moses died. He didn't know that Moses also was born on Zayin Adar. But he heard that Moses died on Zayin Adar. Okay, you have a yard site. That's when Jews only commemorate yard sites. They don't commemorate when people were born normally. So he heard the yard site Moshe Rabbeinu. That's a great time, Zayin Adar. So that was the time of the poor. The lots were by chance. So Haman is living by chance. Megillat Esther is teaching us not to live by chance alone. So, on the 12th year of Achashverosh, he peeled Pur Hu HaGoral. He drew lots, and this in Hebrew is called a Goral. We have the Goralot, by the way, in the Beit HaMikdash on Yom Kippur, of which of the two lambs will become the one for Azazel, and which one will be sacrificed in the temple on Yom Kippur, the two Seirim. Seirim is, I guess, two goats. And it came out on the month of Adar. And Ramban says to Achashverosh, Yeshno am echad. By the way, this is the only time you find Yeshno. Yeshno, Israelis thinks that it's very highfalutin, literarily, to say instead of Yesh, Yeshno. So you have a lot of Israelis, when they write, they say, Yeshno conceptia, whatever. But actually in the Hebrew say that it's better to say Yesh than Yeshno. But I'm just saying it's very common. The Israelis think that it's more higher Hebrew to say yeshno. But this is the one place where yeshno appears in the Persian Empire. So it could be that it's actually an influence of Persian grammar. You know, we have words that were influenced by the Babylonian period in the Talmud, which did not exist before that. Neither in the, or actually, excuse me, they existed in the Mishnah very often too. What we call Ivrit shel Chazal, the Hebrew of Chazal, which starts from the Mishnah and makes its way into Babylonia, into the Talmud. For instance, the word lefichach, and therefore, is not a biblical word. It's a made-up word. It's lefi kach. So lefichach it begins. And then you have in the Middle Ages also words which are influenced both by Arabic language and grammar. So, for instance, you have eichut from the word eich, which means quality. Right? Eichut. This is a word made up in the Middle Ages. Kamut from the word kama, which is quantity. You have the word gashmi, which is Arabic jisim, which means corporeal or material. So, yeah. Whereas in the Tanakh, Geshem is only rain. It's not materialism. So, yeah, Hebrew so changes in those ways. There are other things too. In Mishnaic Hebrew, you have a lot of Greek. For example, the dugma. For example, the dugma. The word dugma, which means for example, is from the Greek word dogma. You have other things like that. Nimus, which today means etiquette, from the Greek nomos, which is laws. So you have things like that also from. Okay, so here, Yeshno, I'm guessing there might have been some type of Persian influence in that term. Okay, let's go. Yeshno amachad. There is one people. Mifuzar umufurad binamim, and they are scattered among the provinces of your kingdom. And their laws, by the way, here the word dat, which in modern Hebrew means religion, here means laws. By the way, even Eish dat lamo, dat seems to be laws. It is a Persian word, and even in antiquity, you have to check what Eish dat lamo is in Hazinu, but definitely in the Megillah it means laws. Their laws and their customs are different than the other people. Doesn't mean they're religion. Religion is a modern term. So their laws are different than other people. They don't like keeping the king's laws. So there's no use for the king to let them be. It's not worth it to have them around. If the king likes, let's destroy them. By the way, this is a very interesting, in the first verse 8. Am echad fozar umufurad. He's actually complimenting the Jews at the same time that he wants to destroying them, because he's saying there are one people despite their dispersion in 127 provinces, which means they have one identity. That's not an easy thing to do. You know, when Italians come to Canada, so the first generation, they still want to marry Italian Roman Catholics. And they want to eat the same food. Second generation, they think about it. Third generation, they don't even remember. So the fact that you have, you know, he's giving us a compliment. We're still one people, despite the fact that by this time, it's almost 2 generations that we've been in the Babylonian Persian Empire. It's towards the end of the 70 years. I don't know if he realizes that, but this is, a lot of people mention that. So let them be destroyed. I will weigh out 10,000 silver talents to those who are performing the work, bring it into the king's treasures. In other words, I'm going to put into the king's treasury 10,000 silver talents for any problems that there might be, any discomfort, any extra work that has to be done to cover this, because obviously he's also in charge of part of the treasury. And the king took off his ring and gave it to Haman, the son of Hamdata, the Agagi, the adversary of the Jews. The king said, Kesef natun lach, keep your silver, don't need it. And to this people, do what you please. Now, my question is, was the king an anti-Semite? Why not?
No, he was an opportunist.
What's the opportunity?
Well, he's having Haman take care of potential threat to his.
I'm not sure if the term opportunist is correct, but I agree with your basic assumption here. Remember, Ahasuerus put Haman in charge of keeping him on the throne. So any potential threat, it's at the discretion of Haman to decide if something is a threat to the throne. So if Haman thinks these people are a threat to the throne, fine. He didn't even ask him the name of the people, by the way. Do you understand? In other words, Haman, if I can't trust you to do your job, so what am I going to do? I'm showing you trust. You say you have to get rid of these people. I'm not even asking questions. Fine. If that's going to keep me on the throne, bavakasha. That's what's going on here. In totalitarian societies, there are certain people who are expendable. The ones who get in the way, unfortunately. But that's just the way they work. I think it was Stalin who once said, if you kill somebody, you're a criminal. If you kill 1 million people, you go down in history. You know who killed the most amount of people in the 20th century? Which dictator? You're on mute, so I can't hear you.
Stalin? No.
Mao Zedong.
Ah.
His own people. Who was number 2? You already got it.
The Armenians? Oh, wait,
No,
she said
Stalin. Stalin was number 2.
Stalin.
Mao Zedong was like 80 million
Was-
people, something crazy like that. And I think Stalin was like 50 or 60 million people. And number 3 was Hitler. Just think of the amount of people who are murdered in the 20th century. It is mind-boggling. And we consider that a century of peace, at least from the war on. But as the war created peace in certain Western countries, the killing kept going. Okay, so I think Haman might be an anti-Semite. He doesn't seem to like the Jews. But Ahasuerus is not clear. Now, Chazal do say that when Esther asked for Ahasuerus something, he says, Ad chatzia malchut, until half the kingdom. And the Chazal in the Talmud says, ask me for anything, but not Yerushalayim. That's called chatzia malchut. In other words, that's where I stop. But it's not clear from the text that Ahasuerus has any problem with the Jews. And remember, at the end of the book, he appoints Mordechai as his second in command. So it really does not look like he has a problem with the Jews at all. You can be an evil dictator and not have problems with Jews, by the way. Like, for instance, okay, I'm going to say something controversial. I don't think Putin has problems with the Jews.
Right.
Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily want to be his friend. A lot of his friends have disappeared. But I'm just saying, it doesn't appear that he has a problem with the Jews. So, unfortunately, because of as a state of Israel, our relationship with the West, it puts us at odds with him, which is not healthy for us, but we're sort of stuck. Again, don't believe in totalitarian societies. I'm just making a statement of what it looks like. So, as they said, something's happening here. So Ahasuerus, it seems that he's making a move here, basically to allow Haman the feeling that the king has faith in him. You have to give him that leeway. And that's what he's doing. So I would say he is a smart king in that sense. Let's keep going, even though we lose out on it. Okay. Now we are here. 12. And the king's scribes were summoned in the first month, which is again on Nisan, the 13th day, and it was written according everything that Haman had ordered the king's satraps. By the way, the term for the king's satraps, achashdarpanei. The word achashdarpanei, you have the word satrap. You see it? Shin, Daled is like te, reish, a. Satrap. It comes from the Persian. And which means basically leaders, political leaders of areas, provinces, and to the governors who were every province, and to the princes of every people. Each province according to its script, and each people according to its tongue. Because remember, they had passed a law. Every people can speak their own language when they killed Vashti. And it was written in the name of Hashverosh, and it was sealed with the king's ring. And letters shall be sent by the hands of the couriers of the king's provinces to destroy, kill, and cause to perish all the Jews, young and old, children and women, on that day of the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Again, Haman picked Adar because it was the month in which Moshe Rabbeinu died, not necessarily though the 7th of Adar. And their spoils to be taken as plunder. And the copy of this writing was for an edict to be given in every province, published to all the peoples, be ready that day. Haratzim, the couriers, went forth in haste in the king's order. And the edict was given in Shushan, the capital. I said Shushan, the capital, is the inner city. And the king and Haman sat down to drink. And the city of Shushan was Navoch, was perturbed. So, what exactly is happening here? What was the edict? What was the edict? The edict was that everybody could destroy the Jews on that day, the 13th of Adar. How do they do that? Let's just imagine for a moment what's going on. If there is an edict that people are allowed to destroy the Jews, what does that mean? What would we call it today if you lived in New York or Los Angeles?
Pogrom.
No, in New York and Los Angeles, there's a term for it.
Boycott.
It's called telling the police to step down, to stand down. So basically, the police were told to stand down on the 13th day of Adar if any anti-Semite wants to beat up a Jew or stab him or even shoot him. Right? That's what I'm assuming. So
open season on the Jews, like today.
they're making it easy, something like that. Yeah. On the other hand, I'm assuming that a certain amount of people will do this. Not everybody's going to fight a Jew because, hey, what if the Jew fights back? What if he also has a knife at home? Okay, he doesn't have a gun maybe, but he might have a knife. So I'm sure there are a lot of people would not, but there was enough people, especially opportunists, take over the Jew. He probably had gold and silver in his house, right? Jews have the money. So maybe it's worth it. We can take over his shop. We can take over this, that. Yeah. Let's go to chapter 4. Chapter 4, by the way, was a chapter in the Apocrypha, the apocryphal book of Second Esther or additions to Esther. Everybody's dominating. In the actual chapter, they're not. And Mordechai Yada, he knew everything what was happening because Mordechai lived next to the palace. Vaikra Mordechai Begadav, he rents his garments, puts on sackcloth and ashes. And he goes out to the midst of the city and cries with a loud and bitter cry. It almost sounds like the opposite of what happened in Nineveh, because the Navi, Yonah, goes to Nineveh and the king takes sackcloth and the people too. And he came up as far as the king's gate, for one may not enter the king's gate dressed in sackcloth. You have to come with a good suit. And in every province where the king's orders and edicts are reached, there is great mourning for the Jews and fasting and weeping and lamenting. Sackcloth and ashes were put on the most prominent because they realized the government had sanctioned pogrom. Remember, when you had pogroms in Russia, Poland, not everybody would take part, but opportunists would, who were willing to take the risk for gain, or maybe to get back at somebody. So here too, this is a sanctioned pogrom. It's like, by the way, Kristallnacht, which was actually planned before that fellow killed the German politician. They discovered it was actually planned earlier. It wasn't.
Right.
It wasn't a
Right.
reaction. I think it was an ambassador.
Dreyfus.
No, not Dreyfus. Dreyfus was really early.
That's the
Dreyfus
First
is
World
like
War.
19th century. No, we're
Yeah.
talking about was a German official who was killed by a young Jew who was like 16 years old. I forget his name, because his parents were deported. And then they blamed the Jews, and that as if was the reason for Kristallnacht, but they thought it were thinking of doing Kristallnacht months and months earlier.
What year was Kristallnacht?
1938.
38?
Before the war. So, okay, chapter 4. So Mordechai, as we said, he's wearing sackcloth and he can't go to the king's palace. All the Jews are in mourning. And Esther's maidens and her chamberlains told her what was happening. The queen was extremely terrified. Titchalchal is, I think, more fear. But yeah, terrified. And she sent clothing to dress Mordechai and take off his sackcloth, but he did not accept. Then Esther summoned the Tach and the king's chamberlains. By the way, the Talmud says the Tach was Daniel, which is interesting, whom he had appointed before, and she commanded him concerning Mordechai. Know what it was and why this was. So the Tach went to Mordechai. He says that the name was Hatach, even though it looks like it's the Tach. And went to Mordechai to the city square, which was before the king's gate, because he can't go to the king's gate. And Mordechai told him everything that had befallen him, and the full account of the silver that Haman had proposed. In other words, Mordechai had the inside news. Mordechai was from the court. He heard things. And that the Haman had proposed to pay money to the king's treasure, caused the Jews to perish, meaning proposed because in the end he got it back. And the copy of the writ, of the edict, the decree that was given in Shushan, he gave the Tach to show to Esther in order to come before the king to beseech him to beg for his people. And the Tach came to Esther and told Esther everything Mordechai said. Again, in name of, you have this. And Esther said to the Tach, she ordered him to tell Mordechai, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court, who has not been summoned officially, there is but one law to put them to death, except for the one who the king extends his golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been summoned to the king now 30 days. So you're asking me to risk my life, Mordechai. Are you sure this is the right thing to do? But look what Mordechai answers her. And this is all through this medium of the Tach. And Mordechai ordered to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you can escape, that you yourself will escape in the king's house from among the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, revach v'hatzalah, relief and salvation shall come to the Jews from elsewhere, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether at a time like this, no, and who knows if for a time like this you attain the king. The eight kazod. In other words, maybe because of this, you became queen. Meaning it's mina shamayim. But he can't say that, because you're not allowed to say that in Megillat Esther. Even when Mordechai should have mentioned God's name, because he said the salvation of the Jews should come from somewhere else. What does that mean? You say, Hashem will help. God for the help. But instead he says, somewhere else. So it's like he can't even say it. You know, you have Jews like that who are so secular, they have to say, they can't say Shabbat Shalom, they have to say Sop Shavua Naim. So it sounds like Mordechai, somewhere else. What's somewhere else? Give us an idea what the somewhere else is. So, and even when he says La'it Kazot, he got the Malchut, it really means, it sounds like Basher, this is the reason why you became the queen. Now there's all of a sudden meaning to the madness. Okay. Also, his answer is quite harif to Esther. He's, don't think you can hide. It's all of us. We're all in the same boat here. I'm sure Esther was a little bit, was quite upset, but also she realized that Mordecai was saying it's now or never. So Esther replied to Mordecai, go assemble all the Jews in Shushan and fast. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, day and night. And also I and my maidens will fast in that manner. Then I will go to the king contrary to the law. And if I perish, I perish. And Mordecai passed and did according to all that Esther. By Avor, Mordecai really means he went back, he went away, meaning he passed the kingdom, at the king's palace, and did according to all that Esther had commanded. Okay. So, should we hold it here or should we continue? It's up to you.
Well, let's continue a little bit, I would
Okay,
say.
a little bit, and then fine. Chapter 5. This is where Esther becomes the main player. In fact, if anything, Mordecai, let's say his main thing was Bigtan Vateresh, that gave him a good connection to the court. But this is where Esther is going to be the major manipulator. I said that in general, in Persian culture, it's this idea of this feminine mystique, what I call the femme fatale, which Esther is going to turn into here. And in their liturgy or literature, this is something supposedly common. That's why the book of Judith has something similar too, which was written under the Persian Empire. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day, after fasting for 3 days, she must have looked awful, that Esther clothed herself regally, and she stood in the inner court of the king's house, opposite the king's house. And the king was sitting on his royal throne in the royal palace, opposite the entrance of the house. Now, let's understand what's going on here. Esther's the queen. Everybody knows who she is. But everybody in the palace also knows what the law is. You got to show the pass. So Esther comes to the first guard, and he probably says, pass, please. Says, I don't have one today, but I'm the queen. They don't know what to do with it, okay? Then she goes to the next, and she's coming towards the king's chamber. There's another guard. Says, pass, please. I don't have one today. You just have to understand. So people are watching. They're not going to do something against the queen unless the king says something. Because remember, she does have the default position if the king pushes the scepter. I'm assuming that there are people probably walking behind her to see what's going to happen here. Because as she's going through and bumping into these various positioned people in the palace, they realize she's coming without a permit.
Probably had wagers.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, okay. So people are wondering what's going on here. So, and it came to pass when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his eyes. The king extended Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand, which allows her to go in. And those who like Esther are now sighing a sigh of relief, and the ones who don't like her are saying too bad. And Esther approached and touched the end of the scepter. And the king said to her, what concerns you, Queen Esther? Doesn't mean what concerns you. In other words, you just risked your life to see me. I didn't have to do what I just did. You know protocol. What the heck is going on? What really concerns you, Esther? Why? What's the emergency? He wouldn't do that without an emergency. And Esther said, so the king says, what concerns you, Esther? What is your petition? Half the kingdom I'll give to you. And Esther said, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for them. And the king said, rush Haman to do Esther's bidding. And the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. Oh. So the king is waiting for a major emergency. Okay. And Esther says, oh, I came because I thought it'd be so wonderful to have a dinner, just the three of us, me, you, and Haman. King's thinking, yeah, right. Like I'm supposed to believe that. But okay, I'll play the game. Obviously, Esther wants Haman to be at the meeting too. I don't know why, but I'll play the game. Says, bring Haman. Now there's more here, but if somebody has to go, we can stop here and continue next Sunday. And I will try to go to as far as possible towards the end next Sunday. Is that her? Or you're like right in the middle of the suspense. So it's your call. Michelle, do you have to run off? Because you were the one who wanted
No.
it early.
No, it's fine. I'm okay. I thought I had to, but I'm okay.
Okay. Okay. Well, in 10 minutes, I'll have to daven anyhow, but okay. So the king says, rush Haman to do Esther's bidding. King Haman came to the banquet Esther prepared. King says to Esther during the wine banquet, the mishteh. Yeah, by the way, mishteh is a banquet, but it's also from the word lishtot. So it looks like they were into drinking. You know, it's like Jackie Mason once said, non-Jews get together and they invite each other for a drink. Jews get together, they invite each other for a piece of cake. So Haman and the king, they drink wine. That's what they do. So the king says to Esther during the wine banquet, because that's what she wanted. Okay, Esther, ma she'elatich, what is your petition? I'm all ready. You listen to it. It shall be granted. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom will be fulfilled. Spill the beans. Then Esther replied and said, my petition? My request? If I have found favor in the king's eyes, and it pleases the king to grant my petition, and Achashverosh is thinking, just get to the point, okay? And to fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I will make for them tomorrow. I'll do the king's bidding. I think is going through Achashverosh's head now. She wants another little banquet together. I mean, this woman just risked her life. And after she was granted the meeting with the king, which obviously she wants something, twice she said it was just to have a little get together, a little soiree with some wine with her and Haman, the two strongest people in the kingdom. I don't think so. You know what's going through Achashverosh's head at this point? There's something that Esther knows, and maybe even Haman knows, but I don't know. And what do you think Esther's trying to do?
Sow doubt in his mind, maybe.
She is trying to unnerve him. She wants him to get nervous. She wants him to start thinking there might be a plot here. She has to put him into a place where she can manipulate him. And the only thing which creates fear in a king is that somebody wants to dethrone them. And for some reason, whatever this is, and she wouldn't give up her life for nothing. This is what Achashverosh is thinking. Why? Because Achashverosh, by this point, is probably paranoid. Somebody already attempted on his life, and he's just wondering who else in the kingdom is there. And Esther is playing on this. She just risked her life to have 2 soirees with wine. No. It's too illogical. Something's going on. Somebody is plotting. We are the 3 most powerful people in this kingdom. We just had a meeting. She wants another one. Something's going on. They know, I don't know. That's what he's thinking. Let's keep going. And Haman goes on that day, he's happy with a cheerful heart. And when Haman sees Mordechai in the king's gate, and Mordechai doesn't rise and is not stirred, Haman was full of wrath against Mordechai. But he restrained himself and he came home because he had a good day. You know, he had a soiree with the king, which might have been a lunch date, by the way. And he sent and brought his friends and Zeresh, his wife. And Haman recounted to them the glory of his riches, the multitude of his sons, and all the ways the king has promoted him, and that he was exalted over the princes of the kings. And Haman said, and Esther, the queen, doesn't say the queen, did not even bring anyone to the party except me. And he calls her Esther without, oh no, it says Esther Amalka, excuse me, bad translation. And tomorrow I'm also invited, her and the king. Hey, I'm like buddy with the king and the queen. I'm like part of the party. I'm not just another clerk. And all this is worth nothing to me every time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting in the king's gate. I mean, this guy is despicable. Zeresh's wife and all his friends said, let them make a gallows 50 cubits high in the morning, say to the king, and they should hang Mordecai in it, and go to the king to the banquet joyfully. The matter pleased Haman, and he made the gallows. In other words, Sha'a misacheket lecha, things are going good for you, get rid of them. This is your chance to get rid of them. Okay, your call.
I have a class going on soon, so I have to leave.
Okay, so I'm going to stop it right here. We are entering chapter 6. Chapter 6 and 7 will be the actual, what I call manipulation of Esther. And we're going to talk about the psychological steps in the manipulation, how he gets Ahasuerus to believe that Haman is trying to dethrone him. That's what this is all about. She has to plant a seed to get to work on his paranoia, which already exists. And she's going to create a situation where he's going to fear for his own life. And under that situation, then she's going to accuse Haman. And I'll explain how exactly this happens. But this woman is very smart. She obviously has a doctorate in psychology. University of Tehran.
But it's also all in her view. She wrote the Megillah, right?
But, well, probably together with Mordechai, but Dichtov Esther Mordechai, so both of them wrote the Megillah.
It's their point of view. So yeah, because my son is a bit of a historian, and he knows what went on in the world during that time, and he has a maybe I'll tell you next week because it's a little bit much, but where Ahasuerus came from in the secular world is different than what the rabbis say, stuff like that. But I'll try to gather the information
I'd
quickly.
be very interested in hearing that. Very interested in hearing that.
Okay.
Okay,
All
so
right.
let's,
Yeah.
very
Okay.
good. Toda
All right,
rabba,
thank you, Rafi.
everybody. Yeah,
Bye-bye.
shalom, shalom.